At my son's wedding, they replaced my seat with a trash can. "It's just a joke. Don't be so dramatic," my daughter-in-law said. Everyone laughed, but when I revealed the DNA test of my grandson, the guests were stunned. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into the venue and couldn't find my name on the seating chart. The elegant script listing table assignments seemed to mock me as I ran my finger down the alphabetical order. Henderson, Hopkins, Jackson, but no Rhonda Mitchell anywhere to be found. "Excuse me." I approached the young woman with the clipboard, her smile bright and practiced. "I can't seem to find my table assignment. I'm Rhonda Mitchell, mother of the groom." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, let me check with the bride about that." She scurried away, leaving me standing there in my carefully chosen navy dress, the one I'd bought specifically for Damon's wedding. 3 months of planning, alterations, and excitement, and now I felt like an uninvited guest at my own son's wedding. When the girl returned, she was accompanied by Indy herself, radiant in her flowing white gown, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate updo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. At 26, she had that confident beauty that comes from never being told no, never having to work for anything. "Oh, Rhonda!" Indy's voice was sweet as honey, but her green eyes held something else entirely. "I'm so sorry for the confusion. We had to make some last-minute changes to the seating arrangement." "Of course, dear. Where would you like me to sit?" Indy's smile widened, and I swear I saw something predatory flash across her face. "Follow me. I'll show you to your special spot." My heart swelled despite my earlier confusion. A special spot? Maybe she had arranged something thoughtful after all. Despite our rocky relationship over the past year since Damon had introduced her, perhaps Indy was trying to make peace on her wedding day. I followed her through the beautifully decorated reception hall, past tables adorned with white roses and gold accents, past the dance floor where soon my son would dance with his new wife. We walked past the main seating area, past the family tables I could see were reserved for Indy's relatives. We kept walking. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, my voice betraying the first hint of unease. "Just a little further," Indy said, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "I wanted to make sure you had the perfect view of everything." We rounded a corner, and she stopped abruptly. "Here we are." I stared in disbelief. Against the wall, next to the coat check area, and partially hidden behind a large potted plant, sat a folding chair. Next to it stood a large silver garbage can. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Indy's laugh was light and airy, as if she'd just told the most delightful joke. "It's your seat, right next to the trash can. It's perfect, don't you think?" My stomach dropped. This can't be serious. "Oh, but it is." "Don't be so dramatic, Rhonda. It's just a little joke." Her voice had lost its sugary sweetness and taken on an edge I'd heard before, usually when Damon wasn't around. "Besides, it's very fitting, don't you think?" I felt my face burn with humiliation, but something deeper was happening. A cold realization was settling into my bones. This wasn't a mistake or even a cruel prank. This was calculated. This was meant to send a message. "Indy, please. This is your wedding day. Surely we can—" "We can what?" she interrupted, her mask finally slipping completely. "Pretend that you belong here? Pretend that you're actually wanted?" The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the back of the folding chair to steady myself. "Does Damon know about this?" I managed to ask. Her smile returned, triumphant now. "Damon thinks it's hilarious. We both do. You should see your face right now." As if summoned by his name, my son appeared around the corner, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. My heart lifted for a moment. Surely he would fix this, would tell his new wife that this had gone too far. "Mom, did Indy show you your seat?" His smile was broad and genuine, and for a split second, I thought he was going to rescue me. Pretty funny, right? The world tilted on its axis. My own son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father left, the child I'd worked 2 jobs to support through college, was laughing at my humiliation. "Damon," I said carefully, "you can't possibly think this is appropriate." He shrugged, wrapping his arm around Indy's waist. "Come on, Mom. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. You're always so serious." Behind them, I could see other wedding guests beginning to notice our little gathering. I heard whispers, saw fingers pointing. Some were laughing. My cheeks burned with shame as I realized the spectacle I was becoming. "See?" Indy said, loud enough for the growing audience to hear. "She can't take a joke." No wonder Damon wanted to distance himself from all that negativity. More laughter rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. I felt exposed, humiliated in a way I hadn't experienced since I was a child. These people, Damon's friends, Indy's family, colleagues, they were all witnessing my degradation, and they found it entertaining. I looked at my son one more time, searching his face for any sign of the compassionate boy I'd raised. But he was looking at Indy with such adoration, such complete devotion, that I realized with crushing clarity that I had already lost him. "Well," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I suppose I should thank you both for making your feelings so clear." I sat down in the folding chair with as much dignity as I could muster. The metal was cold and uncomfortable, and the garbage can next to me reeked faintly of discarded food from the cocktail hour. But I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me run. As the crowd dispersed, some still chuckling about the mother-in-law who couldn't take a joke, I sat there in my navy dress and watched my son's wedding from behind a potted plant. Every laugh from the main reception area felt like another knife in my heart. But as I sat there, something else began to grow alongside the pain, a quiet, determined anger. And beneath that, a nagging feeling that had been bothering me for months, something about Indy's pregnancy timeline that had never quite added up. If they wanted to treat me like garbage, maybe it was time I started paying closer attention to exactly what kind of family I was supposedly being excluded from. Sitting in that folding chair for 3 hours, listening to the celebration I wasn't truly part of, gave me plenty of time to think, and the more I thought, the more certain uncomfortable memories began to surface. It had been exactly 11 months ago when Damon first brought Indy home. I remembered the date clearly because it was my birthday, and I'd been hoping for a quiet dinner with my son. Instead, he'd shown up with this stunning young woman who immediately began rearranging the conversation, the seating, even the meal I'd prepared. "Damon's told me so much about you," she'd said that night, though her smile never quite reached her eyes. "I hope we can be close." Within 6 weeks of that first meeting, they were engaged. Within 3 months, she was pregnant. The timeline had seemed remarkably fast, but Damon was so happy, so completely smitten, that I'd pushed my concerns aside. Young love, I'd told myself. Sometimes these things happen quickly, but now, watching my son gaze adoringly at his new wife while I sat next to a garbage can, those suppressed doubts came flooding back with startling clarity. The baby, little Marcus, had been born exactly 7 months after Damon and Indy's first meeting. 7 months. They'd explained it as premature. Though Marcus had been a robust 8 pounds, hardly the size of a baby born significantly early. When I gently questioned this, Indy had become defensive. "Are you suggesting I'm lying about my own pregnancy?" she'd snapped. "Some babies develop faster than others. Maybe if you'd had more children, you'd understand these things better." The comment had stung, cutting right to the heart of my greatest regret. I'd wanted more children after Damon, but his father had left when Damon was 3, and I'd never found anyone worth bringing into our small, careful world. Indy had a talent for finding these tender spots and pressing on them with surgical precision. From my uncomfortable vantage point, I watched the baby being passed around among Indy's relatives. A beautiful child with dark hair and serious brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He was 9 months old now, just beginning to pull himself up on furniture and babble in that delightful way babies do. But those eyes? They bothered me. Not because there was anything wrong with them, but because they looked nothing like Damon's bright blue ones. Or Indy's green ones, for that matter. In fact, looking around at the wedding guests, I couldn't spot anyone with Marcus's distinctive dark brown eyes and angular features. I shook my head, trying to dispel such thoughts. Genetics could be strange, unpredictable. Babies often looked different from their parents, especially in the early months. I was letting my hurt feelings cloud my judgment. But then I remembered another conversation, one that had happened just 3 months ago when I'd stopped by their apartment unannounced. I'd had to pick up some mail that had been delivered to my address by mistake, and I'd hoped to see Marcus, who seemed to grow and change every week. When I'd knocked, I could hear Indy on the phone inside, her voice raised in what sounded like an argument. "You need to stay away," she'd been saying. "I've told you 100 times. It's over. I'm married now, and that's final." When she'd opened the door, her face had been flushed. Her usual composure rattled. "Rhonda, what are you doing here?" "Just dropping off some mail," I'd said, holding up the envelope. "Is everything all right? You seem upset." "Just a telemarketer," she'd said quickly, but her hands were shaking as she took the envelope. You know how persistent they can be. I'd wanted to ask about Marcus, to spend a few minutes with my grandson, but Indy had made it clear I wasn't welcome. "Actually, this isn't a good time," she'd said, already closing the door. "Marcus is napping, and I have some important calls to make." Looking back now, that phone conversation hadn't sounded like a telemarketer at all. It had sounded personal, intimate even, despite the angry tone, like someone who'd had a relationship with Indy before, or during her time with Damon. Another memory surfaced, this one from just after Marcus was born. I'd been at the hospital, holding my supposed grandson for the first time, and a nurse had made an offhand comment. "He's got such distinctive features for a newborn," she'd said. "Usually takes a few months for their real personality to show in their faces, but this little guy knows exactly who he is." At the time, I'd taken it as a compliment. Now, I wondered if she'd been trying to tell me something else entirely. The reception was winding down now. The cake had been cut, the bouquet thrown, the first dance completed. Damon looked happier than I'd ever seen him, spinning Indy around the dance floor while their guests clapped and cheered. They truly seemed to be in love, at least on his part, but love could make people blind. I'd learned that lesson the hard way with Damon's father, who'd been charming and attentive right up until the day he cleaned out our bank account and disappeared with his secretary. As I finally stood to leave, my legs stiff from sitting in that awful chair for so long, I made a decision. If Indy wanted to treat me like trash, if she wanted to convince my son that I was nothing more than an unwanted burden, then maybe it was time I started acting like someone with nothing left to lose. I walked over to where Marcus was sleeping peacefully in his carrier, surrounded by gifts and flowers. His tiny features were relaxed in sleep, but even unconscious, those distinctive brown eyes and angular jawline seemed to tell a story that had nothing to do with my blue-eyed, round-faced son. "Beautiful baby," I murmured, loud enough for Indy to hear from across the room where she was accepting congratulations. "He's going to be quite the heartbreaker when he grows up." Indy's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. For just a moment, I saw fear flash across her face before she recovered her composure. "Interesting." I leaned down and gently touched Marcus's tiny hand. Such a sweet, innocent child, caught in whatever web of lies the adults around him had woven. He deserved better than that. More importantly, so did Damon. As I walked toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because my humiliation had been resolved. I was still leaving a wedding where I'd been treated like garbage. But because I finally had a purpose, a direction for all the anger and hurt that had been building inside me. I was going to find out the truth about Marcus. Not for revenge, though I couldn't deny that the thought of wiping that smug smile off Indy's face held considerable appeal. I was going to do it because my son deserved to know who he'd really married and what kind of family he was trying to build. If I was right about my suspicions, this beautiful wedding would turn out to be built on a foundation of lies. And if I was wrong, well, at least I'd know for certain, and maybe I could find a way to make peace with the family that no longer seemed to want me. Either way, it was time to stop being the woman who sat quietly next to the garbage can and start being the mother who protected her child, even when he didn't want to be protected. 3 days after the wedding, I sat in my small kitchen staring at the yellow pages, my hands trembling slightly as I flipped through the section marked Private Investigators. The idea felt so foreign, so dramatic, that I almost closed the book several times. But every time I hesitated, I remembered that folding chair, that garbage can, and the way my own son had laughed at my humiliation. The first investigator I called sounded like he specialized in cheating spouses and insurance fraud. The second hung up when I mentioned wanting to investigate my daughter-in-law. It wasn't until I reached Margaret Chen, a former police detective who now ran her own small practice, that I found someone who understood. "Family situations are delicate," she said during our phone consultation. "But if there are questions about paternity, especially when children are involved, those answers deserve to be found. Can you meet me tomorrow?" Margaret's office was in a modest strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. She was a small, efficient woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She listened without judgment as I explained my suspicions, taking notes in a careful, precise handwriting. "The timeline is certainly questionable," she agreed after I'd laid out everything I could remember. 7 months from meeting to birth, claiming prematurity, but with a full-term wait. "And you said the baby doesn't resemble either supposed parent?" "Not at all. But I know genetics can be unpredictable. I could be completely wrong about this." Margaret smiled gently. "That's what DNA testing is for. But I want you to understand what we're talking about here. If your suspicions are correct, proving it will destroy your son's marriage and possibly his relationship with you permanently. Are you prepared for that possibility?" I thought about Damon's face at the wedding, the way he'd looked at me with such casual dismissal. Our relationship is already destroyed. At least this way, if I'm right, he'll know the truth. And if you're wrong, then I'll know I'm wrong, and maybe I can find a way to make peace with reality. Margaret nodded. "Fair enough. For a basic DNA test, I'll need samples from the child and from your son for comparison. The child's sample is usually easier to obtain. A pacifier, a bottle, anything he's put in his mouth recently. Your son's sample could be more challenging." My heart sank. "I barely see Marcus anymore. Indy makes sure of that. And Damon..." I trailed off, realizing how completely I'd been cut out of their lives. "Let me do some preliminary investigation first," Margaret suggested. "Look into Indy's background, see what I can find about her life before she met your son. Sometimes the truth reveals itself in unexpected ways." Over the next week, I found myself living in a strange state of suspended animation. I went through my daily routines, work at the library where I'd been employed for 12 years, grocery shopping, evening walks around my neighborhood, but my mind was constantly elsewhere, wondering what Margaret might be discovering. The call came on a Thursday evening as I was heating up leftover soup for dinner. "Rhonda, it's Margaret. I've found some interesting information about Indy's background. Can you come in tomorrow afternoon?" I barely slept that night, my imagination running wild with possibilities. When I arrived at Margaret's office the next day, she had a manila folder thick with papers spread across her desk. "Indy wasn't entirely truthful about her past," Margaret began without preamble. "She told your son she'd lived in Portland before moving here, working as a marketing coordinator for a small firm that went out of business. That part is true, but incomplete." She slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Indy at what appeared to be a casual outdoor gathering, smiling and laughing with a group of people. In the photo, her arm was wrapped around a tall, dark-haired man with serious brown eyes and angular features that made my stomach lurch with recognition. "His name is Connor Walsh," Margaret continued. "They dated for nearly 2 years in Portland. According to several mutual friends I spoke with, the relationship was serious. They lived together for the last 8 months before she suddenly left town." I picked up the photograph with shaking hands. The resemblance between Connor and little Marcus was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same distinctive jawline, even the same slightly crooked smile. "When did she leave Portland?" I asked, though I was already afraid of the answer. "Approximately 6 weeks before she met your son. According to her former landlord, she broke her lease unexpectedly and left forwarding address, claimed she had a job opportunity she couldn't pass up." The timeline was devastating. If Indy had been living with Connor until 6 weeks before meeting Damon, and if Marcus was born 7 months later... "There's more," Margaret said gently. "I spoke with Connor. He's been trying to locate Indy for almost 2 years. He believes she was pregnant when she left Portland. My soup from the night before threatened to come back up. He knows about Marcus? Not specifically, but he knows she was pregnant with his child when she disappeared. He's been searching for her ever since. I stared at the photograph. This stranger who might be my grandson's real father. He looked like a decent man, someone who'd been searching for his child for 2 years while that child was being raised by my son as his own. "What kind of person does this?" I whispered. Margaret's expression was compassionate but firm. "Someone who's very good at reinventing herself when circumstances become inconvenient. This Connor fellow has a good job, a stable life, but apparently Indy decided she could do better." The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Indy had left Portland pregnant with Connor's child, found my successful, trusting son, and convinced him the baby was his. She'd found herself a better situation and had been willing to lie to everyone, including an innocent baby, to secure it. "I need to get that DNA sample," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in weeks. "Are you sure? Once we have proof, there's no going back." I thought about Marcus, innocent and trusting, believing Damon was his father. I thought about Damon, pouring his love into a child who wasn't his while some stranger in Portland grieved for a son he'd never met. And I thought about myself, sitting next to that garbage can while Indy laughed at the family she was destroying with her lies. "I'm sure," Margaret nodded. "Then we need to be very careful about how we proceed. If Indy suspects what we're doing, she could disappear again, taking Marcus with her. She's done it before." That afternoon, I drove past Damon and Indy's apartment complex, trying to work up the courage to knock on their door. I'd brought a small gift for Marcus, a stuffed elephant I'd picked up at the drugstore, hoping it might give me a few minutes alone with him. But as I sat in my car, watching their building, I realized I was terrified. Not of Indy's hostility, which I'd grown accustomed to, but of what I might discover. What if the DNA test confirmed my suspicions? What if it didn't? Either way, after today, nothing would ever be the same. I was still sitting there, paralyzed by indecision, when Indy emerged from the building pushing Marcus in his stroller. She was dressed casually in yoga pants and a tank top, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking like any other young mother out for an afternoon walk. But I knew better now. I knew about Connor Walsh and Portland and the elaborate lie she'd constructed around my family. As I watched her stop to chat with a neighbor, laughing and gesturing animatedly while Marcus babbled happily in his stroller, I felt a cold anger settle into my bones. She was good at this, I realized. Good at pretending, good at making people believe whatever version of reality served her purposes. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the woman she'd tried to throw away like garbage. I started my car and drove home, my mind already working on a plan. Margaret was right. We needed to be careful. But careful didn't mean passive. It was time to stop being the victim in Indy's story and start being the author of my own. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. On Sunday afternoon, Damon called with an invitation that surprised me so much I almost didn't trust it. "Mom, would you like to come over for dinner tonight? Indy thought it might be nice to have a family meal together." I gripped the phone tighter, immediately suspicious. After the wedding humiliation, the idea of Indy suddenly wanting my company seemed impossible. "Are you sure that's what she wants?" "Of course. We've been talking, and we both feel bad about how things went at the wedding. The whole seating thing, it was supposed to be funny, but maybe it went too far. Maybe it went too far. Not, it was cruel and humiliating, just maybe too far." But I swallowed my pride. This might be my only chance to get the DNA sample Margaret needed. That's very thoughtful. "What time should I come over?" 6 o'clock. "And Mom, could you maybe bring some of those dinner rolls you used to make? The ones with the herbs?" It was such a normal request, so reminiscent of the son I'd raised, that for a moment I almost forgot about DNA tests and Connor Walsh and all the complicated deceptions that had brought us to this point. "Of course, honey. I'll make them fresh this afternoon." I spent the next few hours in my kitchen, kneading dough and trying to calm my nerves. The dinner rolls were Damon's favorite, something I'd made for every special occasion throughout his childhood. They required patience, multiple rises, careful timing. But they'd always been my way of showing love when words felt inadequate. As I shaped the dough into perfect rounds, I thought about what Margaret had told me to look for. Any item the baby has put in his mouth recently. A pacifier, a toy, even a spoon if he's eating solid foods. Just slip it into a plastic bag when no one's looking. It sounded so simple, so clinical. But the reality of deceiving my own family, even a family that had deceived me first, made my stomach churn with guilt. At exactly 6 o'clock, I stood outside Damon's apartment door, holding a basket of warm rolls and trying to project an image of the grateful mother-in-law, happy to be included. When Indy opened the door, her smile seemed genuine enough, though I noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rhonda, come in, come in. Something smells amazing." The apartment was immaculate as always, decorated in shades of white and gray that looked expensive but felt cold. Marcus was in his high chair in the kitchen, banging a blue plastic spoon against the tray, while Indy finished preparing what appeared to be an elaborate meal. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, setting my basket on the counter. "Just keep Marcus entertained while I get everything ready. He's been fussy all afternoon." I approached my supposed grandson carefully, still amazed by how little he resembled either Damon or Indy. Up close, the resemblance to Connor Walsh was even more pronounced. Marcus looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and gave me a drooly smile that made my heart ache. "Hi there, sweetie," I said softly, reaching out to touch his tiny hand. He grabbed my finger immediately, his grip surprisingly strong for a 9-month-old. "He likes you," Damon said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. Look at that smile. For a moment, watching my son beam at what he believed was his child's affection for his mother, I almost lost my nerve. How could I destroy this beautiful illusion? Even if it was built on lies, Damon was genuinely happy. Marcus was loved and cared for. Was the truth worth shattering all of that? But then I remembered Connor Walsh, somewhere in Portland, not knowing if his child was alive or dead. I thought about Damon, building his life around a lie that could explode at any moment. And I thought about myself, treated like garbage because I was the only threat to Indy's carefully constructed fiction. The truth mattered. It always mattered. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Indy seemed to be making a genuine effort to include me in the conversation, asking about my work at the library and even complimenting my dinner rolls. Damon was relaxed and happy, telling stories about their honeymoon and making plans for Marcus's first birthday party. "We're thinking of having it at the park," Indy said, spooning pureed carrots into Marcus's mouth. "A picnic theme, maybe. Family-friendly." "That sounds lovely," I replied, watching as Marcus grabbed the spoon and immediately put it in his mouth, covering it with carrots and saliva. "Perfect. Can I help feed him?" I asked. "It's been so long since I've had baby time." Indy hesitated for just a moment, then handed me the spoon. "Sure. He's actually getting pretty good at eating. Sometimes he wants to do it himself." For the next 10 minutes, I fed Marcus while chatting with Damon about work and weekend plans. The baby was delightfully messy, getting food everywhere, including all over the spoon. When he finally lost interest and started pushing the food away, I stood up to rinse the spoon in the sink. "Let me get that," Indy said, reaching for it. "It's fine. I've got it," I replied, already turning toward the sink. In one smooth motion, I rinsed the spoon and slipped it into the plastic bag I'd hidden in my purse, substituting a clean spoon from the dish drainer. The whole exchange took less than 30 seconds. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. We looked at photos from the honeymoon, discussed plans for the holidays, and I held Marcus while he dozed against my shoulder. Throughout it all, I felt the weight of that plastic bag in my purse, containing what might be the key to destroying everything. When I finally left, Indy walked me to the door while Damon cleaned up the kitchen. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. And for a moment, her voice sounded almost sincere. "I know things have been difficult between us, but we're family now. And I want Marcus to have a relationship with his grandmother." His grandmother. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. "I want that too." She studied my face for a long moment, and I worried that somehow she could see through me. could sense the deception I was carrying. But then she smiled again and gave me an awkward hug. Drive safely. And thank you again for the rolls. Damon's been talking about them for weeks. The next morning, I met Margaret at a laboratory across town. The technician, a cheerful woman named Lisa, explained the process while I tried not to think about what I was doing. We'll compare the DNA from this sample with a sample from the alleged father, she said, carefully labeling the bag containing Marcus's spoon. Results usually take 3 to 5 business days. And what exactly will those results tell us? I asked. If there's a biological relationship, we'll know with 99.9% accuracy. If there isn't, we'll know that too. 3 to 5 business days. It seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. Margaret must have seen the uncertainty on my face. Are you having second thoughts? I thought about Marcus's smile, about Damon's happiness, about the way Indy had hugged me goodbye. Then I thought about Connor Walsh, still searching for his child after 2 years. No, I said firmly. I need to know. The waiting was excruciating. Every day felt like a week. Every phone call made my heart race, thinking it might be the results. I went through the motions of my normal routine, but my mind was constantly elsewhere, imagining different scenarios, different outcomes. Finally, on Friday afternoon, Margaret called. Rhonda, the results are in. Can you come to my office? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely drive. When I walked into Margaret's office, she was sitting behind her desk with a manila envelope in front of her, her expression grave. Before I show you these, she said, I want you to know that whatever these results say, you've done the right thing by seeking the truth. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The DNA test shows no biological relationship between the baby and your son. Marcus is not Damon's child. Even though I'd expected it, even though I'd been virtually certain, hearing the words spoken aloud felt like being hit by a truck. I sank into the chair across from Margaret's desk, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. Are you absolutely certain? 99.9% certain. The lab ran the test twice to be sure. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. I'm sorry, Rhonda. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but that was the strange thing. Part of me was relieved. Not happy, certainly not vindicated, but relieved to finally know the truth. For months, I'd felt like I was going crazy, seeing things that didn't make sense, being told my perceptions were wrong. What happens now? I asked. That's up to you. You could confront Indy privately, give her a chance to come clean to your son herself. You could tell Damon directly or... She paused, studying my face. Given how they've treated you, you could choose to reveal this information publicly, at a time and place of your choosing. I thought about that folding chair, that garbage can, the laughter of wedding guests who found my humiliation entertaining. I thought about Connor Walsh, who had the right to know his child. And I thought about Damon, living a lie that was bound to explode eventually. I need some time to think about this, I said. But even as I said it, I was already beginning to form a plan. Indy had chosen the time and place for my humiliation. Perhaps it was time I returned the favor. The truth had been revealed. Now I had to decide what to do with it. For 2 weeks after receiving the DNA results, I carried the truth like a stone in my chest. Every interaction with Damon felt like a performance, every smile forced, every casual question about Marcus laden with secret knowledge that threatened to spill out at any moment. The opportunity I was waiting for came in the form of another invitation, this one even more surprising than the dinner. Indy called me herself on a Thursday evening, her voice bright and cheerful. Rhonda, I have a wonderful idea. What would you think about hosting a little celebration for Marcus's first steps? He's so close to walking on his own, and I thought it would be nice to have both families together when it happens. My grip tightened on the phone. Both families? Well, my parents are driving down from Seattle this weekend, and my sister's coming too. I thought it would be perfect timing for everyone to meet everyone. A real family gathering. The irony was almost too much to bear. Indy wanted to parade her perfect little family in front of her relatives, with me playing the role of the grateful grandmother-in-law. She had no idea she was about to hand me the perfect stage for the performance of my lifetime. That sounds lovely, I managed. What can I bring? Just yourself. Oh, and maybe some of those dinner rolls again? My parents absolutely loved them when I told them about dinner the other night. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to Damon's apartment complex. In my purse, carefully tucked into a manila envelope, were copies of the DNA test results and Margaret's investigation report, including the photograph of Connor Walsh. I'd also printed out the contact information Margaret had found for Connor, though I wasn't sure yet if I'd need it. The apartment was already crowded when I arrived. Indy's parents, Richard and Patricia Moore, were an elegant couple in their 60s who clearly had money and weren't shy about showing it. Patricia wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and Richard's watch caught the light every time he gestured. Indy's sister, Melody, was a younger version of the bride, blonde, beautiful, and supremely confident. She was currently holding Marcus, cooing at him while he babbled and reached for her dangling earrings. "You must be Rhonda," Patricia said, approaching me with a smile that was polite, but measuring. "We've heard so much about you." I wondered exactly what they'd heard, given that Indy had seated me next to a garbage can at the wedding. "It's wonderful to meet you all. Thank you for including me in this celebration." "Of course," Richard said, though his handshake was brief and formal. Family is family. If only he knew how ironic that statement was about to become. For the first hour, I played my part perfectly. I admired Patricia's stories about their recent cruise, laughed at Richard's jokes about retirement, and listened to Melody's complaints about her job in marketing. The whole time, I kept one eye on Marcus, who was indeed very close to taking his first independent steps. He was pulling himself up on furniture and taking tentative steps while holding on, his face bright with determination. Damon was in his element, the proud father documenting every moment with his phone, calling out encouragement to the baby who believed he was his son. The sight of it made my heart ache. But I pushed the emotion aside. This had to be done. "Should we move to the living room?" Indy suggested as we finished lunch. "More space for Marcus to practice walking." We all gathered in the spacious living room, sitting in a loose circle on the floor while Marcus stood unsteadily in the center, holding on to the coffee table. The atmosphere was warm and expectant, everyone waiting for that magical moment when he would let go and take his first solo steps. "Come on, buddy," Damon called, sitting about 6 feet away with his arms outstretched. "Come to Daddy." The word daddy hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. Marcus looked around at all the encouraging faces, seeming to sense that something important was happening. He let go of the coffee table and stood swaying for a moment, then took one careful step, then another. "He's doing it!" Melody squealed. Everyone was cheering and clapping as Marcus took 5 wobbly steps before sitting down hard on his bottom. Looking surprised but pleased with himself, Damon scooped him up, spinning him around while the baby giggled. "Marcus's first steps," Indy said, tears in her eyes. "I wish we could capture this moment forever." "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, "I think this is the perfect time to share something I've been wanting to discuss with the whole family." The room fell quiet, all eyes turning to me. Indy's smile faltered slightly, perhaps sensing something in my tone. "What is it, Mom?" Damon asked, still holding Marcus. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope, my hands steadier than I'd expected them to be. "I've recently learned some information that I think everyone needs to know, especially you, Damon." Indy's face went pale. "Rhonda, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," I said simply. "Something I probably should have done weeks ago." I opened the envelope and pulled out the DNA test results, holding them up so everyone could see the official laboratory letterhead. 2 weeks ago, I had a DNA test performed on Marcus. The silence in the room was deafening. Damon's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that might have been understanding. "Mom, why would you—" he started. "Because I suspected what these results have now confirmed," I interrupted. "Marcus is not your biological son." The explosion of voices was immediate. Patricia gasped audibly. Richard muttered something under his breath, and Melody's mouth fell open in shock. But it was Indy's reaction that I focused on, the way her face crumpled, then hardened, then crumpled again as she realized her carefully constructed world was falling apart. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "How dare you?" "The test shows zero biological relationship between Damon and Marcus," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos, which led me to do some additional investigation. I pulled out the photograph of Connor Walsh and handed it to Damon. His face went white as he stared at the image, then looked at Marcus, then back at the photograph. "Who is this?" he whispered. "His name is Connor Walsh. He's a software engineer from Portland who's been searching for Indy and his son for the past 2 years. Indy finally found her voice, and when she spoke, it was with the fury of someone who'd been cornered. "You had no right! How dare you spy on my family, interfere in my marriage?" "Your marriage?" I laughed, and there was no humor in it. "Your marriage that's based on a lie? Your family that you built by deceiving my son about the paternity of a child that isn't his?" "Stop it," Damon said quietly, still staring at the photograph. "Just, everybody stop." The room fell silent again. Marcus, sensing the tension, had started to fuss in Damon's arms. My son looked at the baby, really looked at him, and I saw the moment when everything clicked into place. The brown eyes, the angular features, the complete lack of resemblance to anyone in our family. "How long have you known?" he asked Indy, his voice barely audible. Indy opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Damon, I can explain. How long?" She crumpled then, all her defiance disappearing at once. "Since before I met you," she whispered. "I was pregnant when I left Portland. Connor, he wanted to get married, but I couldn't see myself stuck in that life forever. When I met you, you were so successful, so kind, and when you fell in love with me, you let me believe the baby was mine." Damon's voice was hollow, emotionless. "You were so happy about it," Indy said desperately. "You talked about how you'd always wanted to be a father, how Marcus was the best thing that had ever happened to you. I couldn't take that away from you, so you lied to me. For over a year you let me believe." He stopped, looking down at Marcus, who was reaching for his face with tiny hands. "Does he know? Connor? Does he know he has a son?" "He suspected," I said when Indy didn't answer. "My investigator spoke with him. He's been looking for you both." The room erupted again, but this time it was Indy's family in chaos. Patricia was demanding explanations. Richard was asking pointed questions about legal implications, and Melody was staring at her sister like she'd never seen her before. Through it all, Damon sat quietly, holding Marcus and processing the destruction of everything he'd believed about his life. Finally, he looked up at me. "You could have told me privately," he said. "Why did you do it like this?" I thought about that folding chair, about the garbage can, about all the times Indy had made me feel small and unwanted. But when I answered, I kept my voice calm and truthful. "Because she's done this before, Damon. She's very good at manipulating situations to her advantage, at making people believe whatever serves her purposes. I wanted witnesses. I wanted there to be no doubt about what was said and what was proven." He nodded slowly, then stood up and handed Marcus to me. "I need some air." As Damon walked out onto the balcony, Indy turned to face me, her beautiful face twisted with rage and desperation. "You've destroyed everything," she hissed. "Are you happy now? You've ruined my marriage, my family." "No," I said firmly, settling Marcus against my shoulder as he began to cry. "You destroyed it the moment you decided to build it on lies. I just revealed the truth." Looking around the room at the shocked faces of Indy's family, at the chaos and confusion my revelation had created, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph or satisfaction, but a deep, profound sadness for all the pain that could have been avoided if one person had simply chosen honesty over convenience. But along with the sadness came something else. A sense of lightness I hadn't felt in months. The truth was out now. Whatever happened next, we could at least build it on a foundation of reality instead of lies. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making dinner rolls, not because anyone had asked for them, but because the familiar ritual of kneading dough had become my meditation, my way of processing everything that had changed since that Saturday afternoon when the truth finally came to light. The immediate aftermath had been as chaotic as I'd expected. Indy's parents had left that very evening, Patricia barely speaking to her daughter as they packed their bags. Melody had stayed longer, trying to convince Indy to fix this somehow, but even she seemed shaken by the magnitude of her sister's deception. Damon had filed for annulment within a week, citing fraud. The legal process was surprisingly straightforward when you had DNA evidence and documentation of deliberate deception about paternity. Indy had initially fought it, but her lawyer had apparently explained the futility of her position. The hardest part, as I'd known it would be, was watching Damon say goodbye to Marcus. Despite everything, despite knowing the truth, he'd spent over a year believing he was that child's father. Love doesn't disappear just because biology proves it was misplaced. I keep thinking I should hate him, Damon had told me during one of our weekly dinners, a new tradition we'd established in the wake of the chaos. He's the living proof of how completely I was fooled. But when I look at him, you see an innocent baby who didn't choose any of this, I'd finished for him. Exactly. Connor Walsh had arrived from Portland within 2 weeks of my revelation. I'd expected to dislike him, this stranger who'd complicated our lives by simply existing. But he'd turned out to be exactly what Margaret's investigation had suggested, a decent man who'd been searching for his child and the woman he'd loved. The meeting between Connor and Damon had been awkward, but respectful. Two men who'd been unwitting victims of the same deception, trying to figure out how to navigate an impossible situation with dignity. I need you to know, Connor had said during that first meeting, I never knew she was pregnant when she left. If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find her. Damon had nodded stiffly. What are your plans now? I want to be part of my son's life. I want to support him financially. Emotionally, however I can, but I also understand that you've been his father for the past year. I don't want to just tear him away from everything he knows. It was more consideration than Indy had ever shown anyone. The custody arrangement they'd eventually worked out was complicated but fair. Connor would take primary custody, moving to our city to be closer to Marcus and to make the transition easier. Damon would have regular visitation rights until Marcus was old enough to understand the situation, at which point they'd revisit the arrangement. Indy had fought the custody decision bitterly, but her position was weak. She'd committed fraud, she had no stable income of her own, and she'd demonstrated a pattern of deception that judges tend to take seriously in custody cases. The last I'd heard, she'd moved back to Seattle to live with her parents, pending the outcome of various legal proceedings. Richard and Patricia had apparently been less forgiving of their daughter's behavior than I might have expected from people who'd initially seemed so protective of her. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Damon was coming for dinner, and for the first time in over a year, it was just going to be the two of us. No Indy monitoring our conversation, no tension about whether I was welcome in my own son's life, no walking on eggshells around topics that might upset the delicate balance of lies. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. Some things never changed. Damon had always been punctual. Something smells amazing, he said as I opened the door, and for a moment he was just my son again. The boy who'd never met a dinner roll he didn't love. They're almost ready, I said, stepping aside to let him in. How was your week? It was such a normal question. The kind of thing I'd longed to ask him for months without feeling like I was intruding on his carefully constructed life. Actually, pretty good, he said, settling into his old spot at my kitchen table. I had lunch with Connor and Marcus yesterday. I paused in pulling the rolls from the oven. This was still an adjustment for all of us. The idea that Damon would voluntarily spend time with the man who'd unknowingly been his replacement. How's Marcus doing? Good. Really good, actually. Connor's great with him, and he's patient with me, too. He lets me be part of things, even though he doesn't have to. I set the basket of rolls on the table and sat down across from my son. That must be complicated for you. Damon was quiet for a moment, buttering a roll with the same careful precision he'd used as a child. It is. Some days I still wake up and think about what Marcus might be doing, whether he needs anything. Then I remember that he's not. That I'm not. He trailed off. You're not his father, I said gently. But you were. For a year, you were everything a father should be. That love wasn't wasted, honey. It just got redirected. Is that what happened to you? He asked, looking up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of his father's. When Dad left, did your love for him just get redirected? The question caught me off guard. We'd never really talked about his father's abandonment. Not honestly. In a way, yes. All that love I would have given him, I poured into raising you instead. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, for how I treated you, for laughing when Indy put you next to that garbage can, for pushing you away, for choosing her version of reality over yours. I felt tears prick at my eyes. You fell in love, Damon. People do foolish things when they're in love. Trust me, I know something about that. But you're my mother. I should have protected you, not participated in humiliating you. You were protecting what you thought was your family. I understand that impulse. He reached across the table and took my hand. You saved me, you know. If you hadn't discovered the truth, how long would it have gone on? Would I have spent years raising another man's child, thinking he was mine? Would Indy have ever told me the truth? I squeezed his hand. I don't know, but I do know that Marcus deserves to know his real father, and Connor deserves to know his son, and you deserve to build your life on truth, not lies. Even if the truth hurt? Especially then. We ate dinner in comfortable silence, the kind of easy quiet that I'd forgotten we could share. Afterward, Damon helped me clear the table and wash dishes, falling back into old rhythms as if the past year of distance had never happened. I've been thinking about dating again, he said as we finished cleaning up. Not seriously, not yet, but eventually. That's healthy, I said, hanging up the dish towel. You're young, you have so much to offer someone. This time, I want to do things differently. Take it slower, ask more questions, maybe introduce them to my very smart mother who has good instincts about people. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Your very smart mother who's also learned a thing or two about speaking up when something doesn't feel right. Good, Damon said, hugging me tight. I need someone who'll tell me the truth, even when it's difficult to hear. After he left, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, thinking about the strange journey that had brought us here. 6 months ago, I'd been the unwanted mother-in-law sitting next to a garbage can while my family laughed at my humiliation. Tonight, I was simply Damon's mother again, trusted with his thoughts and feelings, valued for my perspective instead of dismissed for my inconvenience. The truth had been devastating in the short term. Marriages ended, families torn apart, an innocent baby caught in the middle of adult deceptions. But it had also been liberating. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending that cruelty was humor, no more accepting treatment that diminished my worth as a human being. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was a photo from Connor, Marcus taking confident steps across a playground while other children played nearby. The message that accompanied it was simple. Thought you'd like to see how steady he's getting on his feet? I smiled, studying the picture of the little boy who would never be my biological grandson, but who would always hold a special place in my heart. In the photo, Marcus was laughing, his arms outstretched for balance, his face bright with the joy of newfound independence. He was learning to walk on his own, away from the lies and manipulations that had defined his early life. In a way, so was I. I texted back, "He looks happy and healthy. Thank you for including me." Connor's response came quickly. "You're the one who made it possible for him to know his real family. We'll always be grateful for that." Real family. Not the family built on convenience and deception, but the messy, complicated, honest family that emerges when people choose truth over comfort. I set my phone aside and picked up the book I'd been reading, settling deeper into my favorite chair. Tomorrow I would go to work at the library, maybe call my friend Susan to catch up, perhaps visit the farmer's market I'd been meaning to explore. Simple pleasures, but they were mine to choose now, without having to worry about whether they would meet with someone else's approval. The truth had set us all free. Even when, especially when, it had hurt. And for the first time in over a year, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own life, valued by people who saw my worth, surrounded by love that didn't require me to diminish myself to receive it. Some victories don't come with fanfare or celebration. Sometimes the greatest triumph is simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing you chose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and your own dignity over someone else's lies. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.